Hey everybody, this is kevinhu, and this is Rooted the Podcast. It's been a solid few weeks since we did an upload here, so I definitely want to apologize for that one. It's been a wild few weeks for us here. For me personally, also for the Rooted team, we recently had our first, I think, kind of staff retreat with the board and everybody in Detroit. I unfortunately had to miss that personally. I was out with COVID. And so I'm recovering. Pastor Kevin's got something going on. I think Pastor Mac is recovering. Anyways, if you could just all pray for us too, as we are continuing to think of y'all and pray for y'all. I was like, gosh, it's like the team is dropping like flies this season. But yeah, just if you could just pray for our health as we continue to just pray, explore, minister, just really seek God, and just how to continue to live out in this ministry, to continue to walk alongside brothers and sisters across the country, as so many of us continue to just wrestle in different contexts. So here we are, we're back, and I will actually be playing a very good podcast from Kevin Butcher here in a second. It's actually one of my favorites from a few years ago. But actually, one of the things I wanted to share with all of you really quickly is this. One of my greatest gifts of being able to serve here with Rooted Ministries is that I get to learn a lot, not only from the different leaders in here, different leaders of Rooted, but meeting so many of you and hearing your stories as pastors and church leaders across the country, and just recognizing there are just so many different contexts and nuances. And I don't know, I just recognize that there are going to be certain kind of questions or things that you're wrestling with in your context that may not be covered on our podcast. And maybe for whatever reason, you are not able to have those kind of conversations one-on-one with someone from our team right now, but it might actually be something that we have been wanting to interact with on this podcast. It might be something that'd be very beneficial for others to hear. So either way, here's my invitation. It is first week of December 2022. So if you're listening to this right now and you've got something on your heart or on your mind and you want to share it with us and say, you know what, I would love y'all to, if you could talk about this topic, share a little bit more here. I would like to learn a little bit more about this or that. If you could, email me. So my email is kevinhu, Kevin, last name Hu, kevinhu @rootedministries.co. So if you could email your question, discussion topic, doesn't have to be polished or whatever it is. If you just want to reach out and just say, hey, Kevin, you want to talk sometime? Like whatever it might be, right? Just throw it out there and we will take it in, and you might hear that topic discussed here on this podcast really soon. Okay, so there's my invitation to you. As I segue now into the heart of the podcast for this week, I just want to say this. As a pastor who in this past year has been sitting on the other side of the podium, that is being in the congregation and visiting different churches, I just want you to know this. When I'm in the seat, and I'm looking up there and I'm listening to these worship leaders, I'm listening to the speaker, so often my heart is both, wanting to hear God, of course, and what he has to say to me in that moment, wanting to worship alongside the worship leaders, but oftentimes I'm praying also for them. And I'm praying that the way they're leading us, the way that they're singing about joy and freedom and worship and grace and goodness, so oftentimes I'm praying that they are actually experiencing the very thing that they are so faithful in and leading us to experience and to feel encouraged or be reminded of. I'm praying that they're experiencing the same thing. And this is why I feel like the podcast that Kevin shared a few years ago is just so important. It's definitely a good one to revisit, just because I know even in that season of ministry in my life when I first heard it, it was a reminder to me, because in the holiday seasons, especially Advent, it's a big deal. And I want folks to be inspired and encouraged and engaged. I want life change. I want them to maybe experience the love of God and the miracle and the gift of Christ for the first time, whatever it may be. And I can do that sometimes. This is me. I can do that sometimes and actually lose sight of the gift for myself. And this is quickly becoming a podcast in itself, and I don't want to just keep rambling. I want to transition, but I want to share this. I had a beautiful conversation today with a sister who is I think some regional director position over at Foster the City. And I was sharing with her our foster care journey and how tumultuous it's been lately. And, just in the middle of it all, in tears, she was sharing with me, she said, Kevin, and I'm going to mess this up a little bit, but, the heart of it should be true. She was saying, Kevin, as you and your wife, Becca, and your family have been just ministering so faithfully and sharing the kingdom, the light of the kingdom with so many people around you, my hope is that in this season in particular, you will be able to taste some of that kingdom for yourself. And so my brothers and sisters out there, that is my prayer also for you. I pray that this podcast now will be encouraging to you. And again, if there is something on your heart that you would love for us to interact with more here on this podcast, please email me at kevinhu@rootedministries.co.
Good morning, and this is Kevin Butcher again, and this is Rooted the Podcast, and I got to tell you, it's only 10:30 where I am, which may not seem that early to some of you early risers, but I don't usually do a lot of talking in the morning unless I have a breakfast meeting or some kind of phone appointment. I'm usually, studying or, trying to drink in something emotionally and spiritually substantial so that I can go into my day. And so this is early for me to be talking. And yet I'm also, I should tell you, I've already been crying because of the topic of this morning. I'm feeling pretty emotional about it, as you, and you'll see why in just a moment. What I want to talk to you about is just this whole Christmas thing, especially for pastors and pastors' families, leaders in churches, but indeed maybe it's something that all of us might be touched by because of the pressure that we put on ourselves to make Christmas this kind of hallmark thing that is it's idealized and it's pressurized to deliver the emotional spiritual goods that somehow will take us somewhere and heal us. I think really that's what we're longing for. We're longing for healing. We're longing to be in a place where we say to ourselves, all is well. All is well. And we put such pressure on ourselves to create that space during this time of the year. And I think especially for us as pastors, we have, one of my friends calls Christmas, the Christian Super Bowl, where we really feel like we have to put on not only a good game, but an incredible halftime show to make sure there's no glitches, that somehow we've got to bring in all the non-believers, all the seekers, or even the non-seekers who just are kind of emotional on the holidays or, like Christmas stuff. And so we have to create some kind of Christmas pageant or Christmas concert, complete with manger scenes and baby Jesuses and orchestras and special music. And first of all, let me just say, I have, especially when I was in a church that had those kinds of resources, and I've been in a couple churches that have, and even in my first church where we were very small and had very few resources, my baby daughter Andrea played baby Jesus, and I think Carla and I were Joseph and Mary, if I remember, at this little Christmas pageant that they put on. So to be honest, in all three churches, I have worked hard to bring these kinds of pageant experiences or Sunday morning experiences or Christmas Eve experiences. And yet I got to tell you, looking back, even though I think some folks were touched and maybe some folks trusted Christ and had some kind of an epiphany, I always hated this time of the year because of the pressure I felt to deliver. And many times I was dealing with my own feelings of depression or the difference between what the season seemed to represent and what I was living in my heart. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and say I never did any of these things. I did. I did work hard to put these kinds of experiences on. But sometimes now looking back, I wish I wouldn't have. And I think toward the end of my time as a full-time vocational lead pastor, I think I did less and less because I just thought, what if we were able to harness the emotional energy, the spiritual energy it takes to put on one of these projects? And again, there's nothing wrong with them, nothing wrong with being creative and artistic and meaningful all at the same time. So it's not like it's evil, but what if we could harness that energy so that our brothers and sisters in Christ around us could simply be present in deep and meaningful ways to one or two broken, lonely, empty human beings around them during this season. If 1.5 billion of us, and they say that's how many people there are in the world who claim to follow Jesus in some tradition, what if we each were simply present in a way that Jesus is present to us, was present when he came to earth, first century Israel, the way he was present to the leper, present to the woman at the well, present to blind Bartimaeus, present to Peter. What if we could harness all that energy and talk about what Jesus means to us and just be present to folks this Christmas? What if that was our strategy? What if that was our Advent movement during these holidays? So I think one of the things I want to say to you pastors, I mean, if you're the creative type and this floats your boat, it can be an okay thing, to really put together one of these experiences. I have a couple of pastor friends that would be especially adept at doing so. But I think for many of us, if not most of us, we don't necessarily have those gifts. That isn't exactly why we went to seminary. And I want to say, take the pressure off of yourself, not just for creating those kinds of Christmas experiences or New Year's experiences, but even for preaching the perfect Christmas sermon, because people will have family and friends there, and you need to impress them. And I'm just going to tell you today, you don't need to impress anyone. And I want to say more about that in just a moment in terms of what you might share during this Christmas season. But I want to say just a word, too, about, we all know this, just about the sadness that's around us during the holidays. And I've already alluded to that at the beginning of this podcast, but sadness around feelings like this, what we're supposed to feel during Christmas versus what we really feel. And who can we share that with? And where are we safe to share those real feelings? How about family dysfunction? There's a lot of pressure to get together as family, but in many ways, the pressure is to put off what's real and try to fake it for one more Christmas dinner. Some of the family dysfunction, some of the lying, some of the abuse, some of the hypocrisy. And I'm not saying that we have to, nobody has a perfect family. I get that. But just, a lot of us think that we ought to be looking forward to getting together with folk who have hurt us deeply or who we have been wrestling to forgive for the last decade, or who really just aren't healthy enough to even be very kind. And so we feel some despair about that. And many of the people we're preaching to and talking to and being with as pastors, they're feeling that's really coursing through their veins during this holiday season, just that family dysfunction thing. And then, of course, there's just the feelings of unfulfilled longings. This is the time of the year when we reflect on what the last year has been, or again, with the coming of Jesus, with Advent, the longing that humanity had in its heart for Messiah, for the one who would come to set things right, that the enemy had been jacking up relationally and in every other way since the beginning of time. So it's a time to think about longings, and many of our longings are unfulfilled. So there's a sadness that comes with that. And then there's just the loneliness. I think the wondering, this season is about love, the love of Christ. Who really loves me unconditionally? Who really sees me? Who really cares about me? I think, again, that's the whole issue of shame. Shame says, I'm not sure anyone really, if they knew who I really was, they would really care about me. And we carry these feelings around with us to some degree, depending on where we are with our healing during the year. But I think they become more acute around the holidays. So just to be aware, maybe more, to be more present to the feeling, pastors, that we've got a lot of hurting people out there. And it's not that we just have to preach to pain during the holidays, but I think it's really important that we're aware of the deep pain that folk are carrying with them. Not to mention, we didn't even mention the fact that there's the loss, relatives, family members who have passed in that previous year, or that we miss at that Christmas dinner. Remember when Dad was here. Remember when, our daughter, before she died of cancer. Folks who have experienced suicide in their family. The holidays are a period when we're just feeling these things more deeply. So just to be aware of that, pastors, as whether we're preparing a Christmas pageant or concert, a special sermon, or we're just hanging out with folks, just to be more aware of the wound that is there, and to be more aware of some of these feelings going on even in our own hearts. But here's a thought about what you might share at Christmas. Instead of, I'd preached, my first few years of ministry, I would preach, the shepherds, and then I'd preach, the Annunciation, and then I would preach Mary and Elizabeth, and then I would, preach, the Magi and Herod and the slaughter of the innocents, and I looked at, I felt pressure every year to bring a new angle, to find some new footnote and a commentary on Matthew and Luke, to kind of make the folk go, oh, there is the Christmas insight that we've been missing all these years. Now our life is going to be really good since we've heard that piece of truth. What about if you feel any of that pressure at all? Why don't you just let that go today, right now, in the middle of this podcast, and say that is not what Jesus of Nazareth is calling you to this Christmas. I mean, if that's what happens for you, if that's kind of the way you study, and that you don't feel that pressure, it's just the way you're wired, fair enough. But for those of us who aren't, what about this Christmas, just sharing, what if you had a sermon where you just said, you know what, maybe there's a text attached to it, and maybe there's not a biblical text attached to it, but you just talk about what Jesus, and this is where I get choked up again, what he means to you, what his coming means to you, who he is to you. Where would your life be without him? And I mean, talk raw and real, and my brother, my sister, pastors, if you can't talk about Jesus in these ways, I don't know, it might be something just to ask yourself, where am I with him? Maybe to take even a couple of weeks during this busy season and pull back and reconnect with him. Because really this is what it's about. The reason we're pastoring is that we're giving him away to people. We're not trying to make good Christians, whatever that is. We're trying to cultivate deep followers of Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified and risen Christ. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I think just sometimes we forget that we can't give away what we aren't receiving. So what would it be like just to share your life with Jesus, who he is to you, who you would be without him, and who you are with him? So I'm gonna suggest, just as we wind this down, I'm gonna suggest a video, and some of you might think it's a little corny, but maybe not. It's about a 3-minute clip. It might be something you even show, but at least it's something that I want to encourage you to watch. It's a video that's floated around in the last several years. Jimmy Stewart is the principal actor, and if you don't know who that is, he's the guy that stars in the perennial holiday favorite, It's a Wonderful Life. albeit it's a black and white movie, and some of you, I'm sure, have something against black and white movies. He also was the star of I think it was even an Oscar winner back in the day, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He was in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Those are a few movies that he starred in that I think are especially outstanding. But he's Jimmy in this particular video he's a custodian at an apartment complex that they're called the Beck Apartments, and his name is Willie Kruger. And he's the video picks up with him around kind of a nativity scene, with small little animals, little cows and camels, and a little Mary and Joseph and an angel, and of course the creche, baby Jesus. And all of a sudden he's transported to some kind of a darkened grotto that would, if any of you have been to Israel, if you've been to Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity, there's a cave. You walk down in these stairs, and the church was built over a site that some think this little cave might have been the manger, might have been the place where Jesus was born, and where the shepherds came to visit him and such. So it kind of has that feel to it. And of course, he's shocked that he's in this manger scene, this real life manger scene. And so he walks into the room past the shepherds and others who are there to observe, and he realizes nobody can see him. He can see all of them, but nobody can see him. And then he sees the baby Jesus. And you'll know why I'm crying if you watch this video. It'll mess you up, man, in good ways. But he walks in and he introduces himself to Jesus. He says, "Hi, I'm Willie Kruger. I'm a custodian over at the Beck Apartments." And then he says, "Oh, but in his inimitable way, he's got this way that I wouldn't even try to imitate on this podcast, because he's just Jimmy." He says, "But you knew that, didn't you? You know who I am." And then he says, "I didn't bring you a gift, but I suppose that's okay." And then he starts to talk to him, and he says, I want to thank you for all that you've done for me over the course of my lifetime. As long as I can remember," he says, "you've been right by my side. I'll never forget how you were with me during those first few days after I lost my wife, Martha." He says, "I've always been able to count on you. No matter what was going on in my life, I felt you there right by my side every time." He says, "Even when I didn't feel good about myself, you cared for me, and it meant the world to me." And then he goes on to talk about an experience. I don't want to ruin this for you. He talks about an experience he had with one of the people in the apartment and how Jesus met him there. And then at the very end, Jimmy, kneels in front of the manger, and he says, "I love you." He says, "You're my closest, my finest friend. And that means I can hold my head high wherever I go." And then he bows his head and he just says, "Thank you. Thank you." And of course, in the background, there's some, I don't know, probably the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing "What Child Is This?" It is, in fact, just in conclusion, let me just say one of the things that Jimmy Stewart said. He was a believer, by the way, as far as we know. He was a believer in Christ. He did that scene on one take, because what he said to those who were interviewing him about this particular movie and this particular scene, he said, there was so much emotion that came out of me during that scene, I couldn't do it twice. I only had one of those scenes in me around this theme of Jesus and what he means to me. So I guess what I'm saying is, what if you were able to share what you feel about Jesus with your people this Christmas, what he means to you, and let the tears flow? Because, and this is what I believe, he's everything. He's everything to me. Without him, I'm a dead man walking, and likely I'm actually a dead man. He is everything to me. And I love him. I love him with all of my heart, and I don't always love him well, but I love him, and I'm so thankful for his presence in my life. And really, all I want to do is help others know how much he loves them, because I think that when they begin to understand how much he loves them, they will be very near home, which is what they're looking for. They'll be very near home. So there's a couple thoughts about Christmas, and I hope it takes some of the pressure off of you. Be your true self. If you're a pageant person, go for it. But if you're not, pull back. Don't try to preach a perfect sermon. Be present to the pain in people's lives. Be present to your own pain. And maybe sometime this Christmas, just take a sermon and just write down a few notes about what Jesus means to you and share that with your folks. So God bless you. I love you, and I'm with you, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.